Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about Wild Rift and League of Legends and sort of where these two games are going and what this means for the sort of future of the development of both of them. Now, if you aren't aware of a couple of things that Wild Rift has done, obviously that is the mobile, I don't want to say port, but the mobile version of League of Legends, shall we say. Essentially, Riot are taking the League of Legends format and trying to apply it to a mobile game system. So, a lot of the game plays the exact same, but there are some major differences. Now, first and foremost, not all of the champions that are being ported into Wild Rift are making the transition in the exact same system as they were before. A big reveal to me was when Riot were doing their Yordle event and they were talking about Teemo in particular. Teemo's kit is actually relatively different in Wild Rift than it is in Summoner's Rift in the actual PC version of League of Legends. Teemo's passive and E have been swapped, so his passive is Toxic Shot, his E is the ability that makes him stealth, and his W has actually been reworked even more dramatically. Now it actually gives him a tiny little dash, after which point he gets bonus movement speed, which that's a big change for Teemo. That gives him a little bit more mobility. It gives him the ability to open the gap between enemies a little bit more effectively than he was able to before, and it's a lot more dynamic than something like Move Quick, where you press a button, you get a small amount of bonus movement speed, and your enemies can't turn it off with damage, right? Like, that's a big deal and a big change between regular Teemo in League of Legends and Wild Rift Teemo. Another big development here to talk about a little bit in regards to Wild Rift versus League of Legends was the presence of Lunar Beast Miss Fortune. Now, what is Lunar Beast Miss Fortune, I hear you ask? That skin doesn't exist in the game. I can't actually buy that. That's not in the client. I can't see it. Where is it? Well, it's not a skin that was released in League of Legends. It was released in Wild Rift as a Wild Rift exclusive. That skin will only be available in Wild Rift. Riot have sort of been a little cagey about whether or not they would ever port skins over from Wild Rift into League of Legends or vice versa. But suffice to say, for the moment, Lunar Beast Miss Fortune is only going to be available in Wild Rift. And conversely, for those of you who are already starting to complain about favoritism and that sort of thing, Lunar Beast Aphelios is a Summoners or a League of Legends PC exclusive skin. That skin will not be available in Wild Rift. I'm assuming it's because Aphelios is not actually in Wild Rift at the moment, but either way, even when Aphelios does become available in Wild Rift, he will likely not be able to get that skin or keep that skin in Wild Rift. They will end up not porting it over because that is the League of Legends exclusive skin. So, these sort of matters aside, I do think that all of this is an interesting development. I do think it's a good development, but I want to talk a little bit about what this does mean for the future of both of these games. Obviously, if you have these sort of unique things happening in Wild Rift versus regular League of Legends, it sort of starts to show that Wild Rift is not just League of Legends but mobile. It is not a port of League of Legends. It is not automatically everything you know about League of Legends, you're going to know about Wild Rift. It is its own game with its own sort of development cadence, its own sort of cycle, and its own needs. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Mobile is a very different environment from PC gaming in particular. Mobile gaming places a lot of emphasis on drop in, drop out, sort of play very quickly, and then be able to hop off and do things. It's not a lot of emphasis on the sort of 30 to 45 minute matches that League of Legends has. Wild Rift wants you to be able to play much more quickly, so that way you can get through matches more quickly. So while you're standing in line someplace or waiting around somewhere, you can get through a match in a much more quicker time. The control schemes are also totally different, which means that Wild Rift has sort of different concerns about what champions and abilities they can actually introduce. For example, I would be very surprised to see very complex champions like Azir or Kalista ever show up in Wild Rift because of the mechanics needed to execute what those champions actually want to do. Even something like Lee Sin surprised me because insecking, I believe, is still possible in Wild Rift, but must be very, very difficult to do as opposed to on Summoner's Rift, where it's a lot easier to sort of do that, actually in PC League of Legends, I should say. It's technically still Summoner's Rift, but either way, these sort of mechanical things are either not possible at all in Wild Rift or significantly harder to do, which is a big deal from the standpoint of developing this game. If you want to bring over a League of Legends character, but maybe they have an ability that's a passive, like Teemo's Toxic Shot, which doesn't feel good because then player has this button that they can't actually click, does nothing. If they're not super familiar with League of Legends or how the game works, that is kind of a feels bad moment. So it made sense to kind of swap those two buttons around and give the player more active control over what they're doing on their champion, more things to press. It also means that just in general, if a very complicated champion is ever added to League of Legends, they may never show up in Wild Rift, or if they do, they'll show up in a very altered fashion because Riot will need to be able to dumb down their kit into a form that makes sense in a mobile MOBA. Otherwise, there's no reason to introduce that champion. And so knowing now that Wild Rift sort of has these differing needs and differing wants, it is sort of raising the possibility that first of all, there will be other champions and other sort of things done in Wild Rift, little tweaks to champions that we all know and love. Azir, for example, may be totally changed and have a different ability entirely. Maybe he summons a soldier and immediately sends it out in sort of a combination WQ, as opposed to right now where he's able to summon the soldiers on his own, right? Those sorts of changes I feel like will definitely happen because Wild Rift will need to be making the champion playable in their game. The other thing is that, especially looking at Lunar Beast Miss Fortune and seeing that Wild Rift is okay with having its own exclusive content, there is very much so the possibility that Wild Rift will have version-unique champions. So a champion that exists in Wild Rift that does not exist in League of Legends at all, that has never been developed in League of Legends. And that sort of thing sounds really scary, and it definitely sounds sort of a scummy thing to do. What if I really like how this champion looks or really like how this champion plays? I don't want to have to buy and play this, mobile MOBA game in order to play that champion, or vice versa. If I'm a Wild Rift player and someone says, hey, play League of Legends, well, it's going to suck for me if my favorite character isn't actually in that game, if I'm not able to hop over and keep playing the same character I'm used to. But the reason I think this is a good thing is because, first, it does give Riot the ability to develop their Runeterra IP a little bit more, in the similar fashion how Legends of Runeterra has sort of created its own characters. Even though they're not champions yet, I would not be surprised at all if champions like Cythria or Commander Ledros became characters at some point, but that's kind of getting to my second point. But either way, it sort of is able to develop the backstory and sort of the Runeterra IP as a whole, which I think is a really big deal and a really good thing for the game, for all games going forward, is to have this very rich and diverse setup for Runeterra. I think that Riot have really been doing a good job of making this super cool and something that people really like. And so I think it just makes sense for these games to not have to be beholden to League of Legends, that they can sort of step out on their own and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did X? And this sort of gets along to my second point, which is that if all these games, Legends of Runeterra, Wild Rift, and League of Legends, who all sort of exist in the Runeterra IP, if they're all sort of doing their own things and developing in their own ways and creating unique characters that don't exist in the other two games, what it does is it gives the games that don't have that content sort of a way to look over and say, hey, that's actually really cool. Should we do that? Can we add that to our game? Is there a way we can execute on that? Which is definitely a good thing going forward, because instead of having one team that's sort of all either agreeing with each other or has the same thoughts about what a game wants or needs, if you have multiple games that are all kind of looking at each other and saying, hey, well, we're going to do this and they're going to do that and we're going to do this other thing, then you can sort of pull the best from every world into your own game. If Wild Rift creates a super unique, interesting champion, then League of Legends can say, hey, that's a really cool champion. We want to try and add that to our own game, especially if people really like it. And conversely, League of Legends right now is sort of being the recipient of a lot of the envy. Wild Rift naturally is getting a lot of their champions, all of their champions, from League of Legends itself. But there may come a time, especially League of Legends has been releasing characters most recently, champions like Set or Yone or Lilia, who are very popular, who people like a lot, that Wild Rift can look at and say, hey, should we expedite these champions? Should we focus on some more of the old standbys? Who do we actually want to see in Wild Rift? Which are the champions we actually want to take a look at? And conversely, Legends of Runeterra can do something similar, right? They have a very large cast of characters that are big fan favorites. Again, you have characters like Cythria, who's hugely popular. I think she's the only non-champion to have her own emote in Legends of Runeterra. Lots of people love Cythria, and she's essentially a creation of Legends of Runeterra. You have other Legends of Runeterra cards like Commander Ledros, who is a character that people, now that they know he exists and have a physical form they can see him in, they're like, oh, I want to see this character in the game now. Like, I would love to have this character as a playable champion. That sort of thing is going to continue to go forward, and that's something that then Wild Rift and League of Legends can both take a look at and say, hey, people really like Cythria, maybe we should actually make her new champion. People really like Ledros. People really like Karina Varaza or Jay Medarda or any of these other characters that exist in the card game, maybe they should become champions too. So when you have all these teams sort of collaborating with each other and sort of looking over each other's shoulders and saying, hey, those are good ideas, hey, they're extending the lore in this particular path, maybe we can do something similar like they did with the Yordle cinematic that was released to go along with the Wild Rift release of Yordle characters. There's just a lot more development that all of these games can have and enjoy and benefit from. And I think that's a really cool thing going forward. So even though it sounds scary and it sounds weird that there could be a League of Legends champion that isn't playable in League of Legends, or potentially skins or other content that's available in one game but not another, I don't think it's a bad thing in the grand scheme of things. I think that at the end of the day, each game will have its own identity and be able to pull from the best of all worlds in order to make itself the best it can be. But those are just kind of my thoughts on all these issues. Let me know what you guys are thinking of any of this down in the comment section below, especially if you hate the thought of things like version-exclusive skins or version-exclusive champions. I would love to hear what you guys are actually thinking of all that down in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.